Thank you, everybody, for coming. And let me make sure I know how this works. Okay, so Scott, thank you very much, Fellowship Chamber, for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to everybody for coming. I want to talk to you today about why a Jewish Jesus matters. Now, I'm a Christian, I'm a Gentile, I'm not Jewish. And so, when we think about Jesus, right, he's the Savior for everybody. He's the Savior for the world, for all the nations. So why does it really matter too much whether he was Jewish, other than that was the line that the Messiah came through? So I want to kind of answer this question today, why a Jewish Jesus matters. And so I'll start off with a little bit of a guessing game. Then I'll move into sharing something with you that you may or may not know about Jesus. And from there, we'll try to answer this question, investigate and answer. Okay, so first question, who is this? Jesus, that's right. Bingo, good job. So we all have ideas, right? We see images and we know right off the bat that's Jesus. We're familiar with certain pictures, certain looks, certain ways that he is. And we have those images in our mind. He's easily recognizable to us. Okay, so the next question. Who is this? This is me! Excellent. This is me, and this is Snapchat me. And if anybody's not familiar with Snapchat, it's an app that allows you to put all these different filters, and it changes your voice, and you can send funny messages back and forth to your friends. It's quite entertaining. One of my employees, we actually use it to give each other work updates. So I might look like a bunny and be telling her, hey, I just had a meeting with Gopal, and we reviewed this mapping matrix. And I'm saying it like, right, we just had a meeting with Gopal. So it's really good, right? Makes it fun. But these are filters, right? And I asked myself, if I were to have children, maybe some of these you've seen posted on Facebook in this, right? If I were to have children, and 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 generations down the road, all they ever saw were these. Like, let's say this one, right? Let's say I always post in this because it makes me look 5 years younger and my complexion's perfect and I've got these nice glowing flowers. If that was all they saw, would they think this is what I really look like? Mm-hmm. So, the next question I'm going to ask you is the Jesus we know ever filtered? So 2,000 years has passed, right? A long time has passed in history, church history, Jewish history, world history. Is the Jesus we know ever filtered? So what is a filter? Well, my 2017 Merriam-Webster iPhone dictionary app defines a filter as something that has the effect of a filter, as by holding back elements or modifying the appearance of something. So that's how they're defining a filter. So we'll use that as we kind of explore this idea. Okay, now here it comes. The one thing you may or may not know about Jesus. Jesus fulfilled the law perfectly. How many people in here didn't know that? We all know that, right? Jesus fulfilled the law perfectly. Well, one thing, though, that we might not realize is not all of us are that familiar with all the laws that Jesus fulfilled, right? We don't oftentimes in Christianity explore or study the laws of the Old Testament and what laws Jesus actually lived out when he fulfilled the law. So, to familiarize you with one of these, Deuteronomy 22:12, you shall make for yourself tassels on the 4 corners of your garment with which to cover yourself. This was one of the commands that was given to the Hebrew people at Mount Sinai when God gave the law right, at Mount Sinai to Moses and the Hebrew people. And in Numbers 15, it goes a little bit more into detail. It says, speak to the sons of Israel and tell them that they shall make for themselves tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and that they shall put on the tassel of each corner a cord of blue. It shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, so as to do them and not follow after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you played the harlot, so you may remember to do all my commandments. So we know that God gave them this commandment. Now, if anybody's in Deuteronomy, the Hebrew word actually is gedilim, and it means like twisted cords. And in Numbers, the word is tzitzit, and it means like tassel. And so in practice, they combine these two, mitzvot, right? Like, call mitzvot is like when a command, means good deed. So they combine the act of these together. And if anybody's not familiar, you can see up here, there's like this tassel with a cord, and they're twisted and knotted and tied. And so that's how Jewish people fulfill this command. Now, oftentimes you'll see them in white because it came out of practice to stop having the blue cord when the Jewish, they went into exile and all these things happened, and they kind of lost knowing what animal was used to actually make the original blue. So they just stopped doing it because they didn't want to do it wrong. So you often see them in white nowadays. Now, this was a command. And if we know Jesus fulfilled the law, we should know and be pretty comfortable with the fact that he would have worn tzitzit. So, did he, right? Is there any evidence that he actually did? I mean, logically we know he fulfilled the law, he would have probably worn tzitzit, but is there any other evidence? Well, in the New Testament, in Matthew 9:20, this is the story of the woman with the bleeding issue for years. She reaches out, touches the fringe of his cloak. The word here that's used to describe Jesus when it talks about the fringe of his cloak is this Greek word kraspedon. And I'm probably pronouncing that wrong because I don't know how to pronounce Greek very well, but in the Hebrew, in the concordance, it's Strong's 2899. Now, this word so there is a Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint, and it's the primary resource for the Old Testament in Greek. And in Greek, the word that was used to translate tzitzit from Hebrew into Greek was this word kraspedon, right? This is essentially the tzitzit. Now, in 9:20, this is the word that's used to describe Jesus, the fringe of his cloak, the kraspedon, the tzitzit, the tassel. So you can see sometimes in the English here, it's translated different ways. But now we're going to kind of ask the question again, is the Jesus we know ever filtered? And so when we look at this how it's translated for Jesus, and then in Matthew 23:5, when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees about lengthening their tzitzit, right? So that they're showing their religiousness, right? They're showing how religious they are by lengthening them. We see that it's kind of translated a little bit differently, right? Here it's translated as tassels on their garments, the borders of their garments, the embroidered prayer shawls, right? It sounds much more Jewish. The English translation for how Jesus is described is a little bit maybe less Jewish, right? Oh, he's wearing a fringe on his cloak. Maybe, let me look at it this way. Who in here has ever been part of a Bible study where 3 or 4 people might look at the exact same scripture, kind of have a different perspective on it? Yeah? We've all had that, right? Right? Okay. So the same thing kind of happens with translators, right? I like to give translators the benefit of the doubt and understand that oftentimes I believe when translators are doing their translation work that there's maybe not a negative bias, but there is a bias within them to try and translate as faithfully as they know, right? And that, how they know, is going to be based on how they've been taught, their training, maybe their cultural background. Different things will influence or filter how they translate the text, right? And so here we do kind of see almost like this translation. Now, why? Is there maybe perhaps an uncomfortableness with the fact that Jesus is Jewish? Or I don't know, but it's just interesting to note, right? The same Greek word, both Jesus and Pharisees were wearing the same Greek word, but we do see it translated differently. So going back to these pictures, right, that we recognized as Jesus, when we look at them, we see, right, let's look at these 3 first, right? There's no tzitzit at all. And up here, some of you guys might recognize this. This is from the movie Son of God. And it's interesting, right? Here's Jesus. He has his talit on, which would be like the robe, which the custom in the day was to have on the 4 corners, the tzitzit, the tassels. And here we see the Pharisees with the tzitzit, right? With the tassels. So it's kind of interesting, the juxtaposition. But one of the things I want to just give you food for thought is, if a Jewish rabbi were to have curiosity about Jesus, right? I'm going to go to the movies and maybe sneak in the back and watch this movie, Son of God, and who is this Jesus fella, right? Would he not perhaps look at this and think, gosh, where are Jesus and tzitzit? Is he maybe a lawbreaker, right? Maybe he didn't really fulfill the law perfectly like they say, right? We don't necessarily think that much of it, but for someone else, it might actually have a fairly significant impact on how they perceive him. And now the other thing that's interesting, right, is this picture here of Jesus is actually from the Jehovah's Witnesses. And you will almost always see them represent him, Jesus, with a fringe along the bottom, right? We remember when we saw the translation in English, it said fringe and a blue cord along the top. Many of you probably can't see it because we're a little bit far away, but they show this. Now, the funny part is that here we see a desire to be authentic, right? And to be like authentic to the scripture. But in practice, this is not how Jewish people wear this command. Like, this is not reality of how a Jewish person would fulfill this command. It's just not the custom. So it's, it's kind of interesting, right? So when you think about why a Jewish Jesus matters, I do believe that cultural, historic, and linguistic context matters. These are filters that kind of can happen, and they help us, I believe, why it would really matter is I can say that without it, right, we miss out on things we don't realize, right? Like in the Son of God, right, that we didn't even realize that the tzitzit were maybe missing. We didn't realize that there was maybe something that implied that Jesus was a lawbreaker instead of having fulfilled the law perfectly. And then we also might see things with an incorrect understanding, right? Or an incorrect application, maybe. Like, for the example with the pictures that the Jehovah's Witnesses have, right? Like, that's not really the custom of how it's done. So, I want to just move on next to this story here, the lost and found, right? So when we think about in Luke, it goes a little bit more in detail of the story of the woman with the bleeding, right? She sees Jesus, the crowds are all around him, and she's thinking, if I just touch his clothing, she says, right? Kind of funny, like, if I just touch his clothing, why not just if I touch him, right? We might not think that way. But yet what we've kind of missed is actually, this kind of going along the lines with we might miss something that we don't even realize, is that in Malachi, there's actually a really wonderful prophecy about the Messiah. And it says that there is healing in his wings, which the Hebrew word is kanaf, and it means the corners, and it refers to the tzitzit. So when she was reaching out in faith, it wasn't just that, he's the celebrity kind of coming to town, right? He's, if I touch him, he'll be healed. He's healed other people. She was really putting her faith in the prophecy in Malachi that he was the promised Messiah. And if I touch his wings, I will be healed because it has been prophesied. Right? Like there's a deeper story there than we might normally realize. And it really is kind of this wonderful beauty to it, right? That I think it gives us such a closer respect, like an appreciation for her faith and kind of how that faith came about, right? And so what I thought was also interesting is I found this picture is, it's this depiction of the healing of the bleeding woman from the catacombs of Marcellinus and Peter in Rome. And this is from the 4th century, right? We see here that she's actually, I don't know if you guys can see it, but she's grabbing hold of his tzitzit. It's kind of neat, right? But then you look at this picture too, and there's other filters applied. The crowds are missing. Jesus doesn't have a beard, right? But it's funny, like the tzitzit is there. So it's just funny, right? Like filters are always being applied. They're always there. But are we seeing them and just recognizing and knowing what filters are there? Okay, so an unfiltered Jesus, right? When we remove filters, it helps us to understand the scriptures more clearly, right? We get a more crisp view. We get a clearer picture. We get more details that we might not have realized. And it helps us to understand the people and the stories in the scriptures better, right? We understand maybe why the woman reached out and touched the corner of his garment. And I love this article that Charles Stanley wrote on the intimacy of God. And this is where I really feel a lot of it boils down to, is that Charles Stanley said about our intimacy with God and our relationship with God, that in fact, the depth of this relationship is limited by the extent of our transparency with him. Right? And isn't that so true? The more we break down our barriers, the more we are transparent with the Lord, the more we show him who we really are, the more work he does inside of us, right? And the more he transforms us, and it's this beautiful thing. But I kind of also make the proposal that so too would be the same when we remove filters from Jesus, right? The more we can remove these filters that have maybe been applied on him and on the scriptures, he becomes more transparent to us. The apostles and their words become more transparent to us. And so not only are we becoming more transparent to him, but he's becoming more transparent to us. And it does impact and deepen our relationship with him. And the depth of that relationship and intimacy will increase. I've experienced it, so I'm speaking in kind of my own personal testimony there. So a lot of people have this desire at times to learn about maybe the Jewish roots of the Christian faith or a Jewish understanding of Jesus, kind of some of the things that I've mentioned, right? Like after they've talked with me at times, they're curious. They're like, hey, I'd like to learn more. No. So the question is, where do you go and who do you trust? Right? With any type of movement where the Lord is, right, the enemy's also there attacking it. And there's a lot of different resources. There's a lot of different ministries. A lot of the churches aren't equipped to educate their people on the Jewish roots of the Christian faith because they're coming from the Gentile Christian church history and they just don't know, right? There's such a divide. And this is really the role that First Fruits of Zion plays. And I've studied several different ministries out there. I've been studying First Fruits of Zion materials for over 8 years now. So I've been a big fan of their materials for years. It wasn't actually until this last year that I became an outreach representative for them and started working with them. But their role is to be, they specialize in the study and teaching of scriptures from its historical, linguistic, and cultural context. And so the reason I've really come to love their materials is I really believe of all the materials out there, I believe they're one of the most balanced. I believe they're one of the most scholarly and well-researched. And I believe that I really love that they have a love and appreciation for the church and the Gentile, tradition, they really value and have a great love and respect for the Gentile Christian traditions and the Christian people. It's not a us versus them, right? They really see it as we're all the body of Messiah and we all should come together. So that's really one of the, their resources are really excellent. And so, again, where do we begin? Well, I always say you can always begin where stuff is free, right? That's always good. So there are cards. Each of you has a card. And you can sign up for, we have this book here, which is Restoration of Torah, Restoring the Torah to the Jewish, the Torah of Moses to the Disciples of Jesus. And this was actually the first book I read of theirs over 8 years ago. This is my version. And it says Angela, because she was the one who loaned it to me and eventually gave it to me. And I got her one of these other ones, but that was the first edition. And now they're actually offering this free, and it is a revised and expanded edition. I've read this edition as well. I like it actually better because it is a little bit more expanded. And there's a lot of great information here. It will challenge some of your paradigms maybe, right? Because it takes a Jewish look, right? It's a Messianic Jewish. It's Judaism where they believe that Jesus is the Messiah. So it will perhaps challenge some paradigms. But at the same time, there's a lot of great resources in here on the church history, why did we actually have this split, right? Why did the Christian church kind of split off from the Jewish? Because we know from the New Testament that originally the Gentiles were flocking to the synagogues, right? So how did that split all happen? What's kind of happened? How has the church history impacted filters, right? Impacted how we view things? So a lot of that information is here. It is a great resource. I kind of think it's like a Mere Christianity in a sense. It's like a great book for everybody to read. You may not always agree with everything in it, but it's a great resource. And then there's also Messiah Magazine. And this is a quarterly publication that they do. It has articles and stories about Israel and just Messianic Jewish perspectives on different things and kind of teaching some of the Jewish things. I think there's even a children's activity in the back, which is kind of nice. And then the other two resources that I want to mention, because personally these are two favorites of mine, is Hayesod. And this is a 10-lesson video Bible study discipleship course. I have personally led this twice, but the format is that they have like an online format. Anybody can take it individually, or people can do it as a group, like as a family. Now, when I led it, I actually led it at Oracle. We have a Christian diversity group, and so I led it there. I had a couple people calling in from like Virginia and out of the area. I always get great feedback. The other one I led it with was my speech therapist when I had a problem with my vocal cords. And I've always gotten really, really wonderful feedback on this. What I feel like they do is they take really complex theology and they make it very simple and easy to understand. And so I loved this course. I think it's a great course. And then here's the Torah clubs. There's 6 different sets, and each set actually has 5 books or 5 volumes. These are very in-depth studies, but they're wonderful resources for pastors, for any serious like Bible study, like they really like to dive into the details and get into it. There's different ones. 2 of them are based on the Torah itself, right? The first 5 books of the Old Testament. One of them is based on some of the prophets. The Haftarah portions, which is basically some of the prophets, and then from the Old Testament. And then there's one called Shadows of the Messiah. This is actually the one I'm using as kind of the base study material for the Torah study program at Beth Yeshua. And what it does is it really is focused on where do we see all the prophecies about Messiah? Where do we see Messiah in the Old Testament in the first 5 books? I love this study. And then there's also Chronicles of the Messiah, which covers the Gospels, and Chronicles of the Apostles, which covers Acts, and approaches those from more of a Messianic Jewish perspective and understanding. So those are the resources. And really, I mean, that's it, I guess. So thank you.